The last path that we will eventually get to is the path of great perfection, or the path of self-liberation, the path of Dzogchen. And this is one that you can't say a whole lot about because it is a kind of a very simple practice in one way, and yet there's a lot to it. And so it's easier to describe than it is to actually do this. And it's usually integrated into the path of Tantra, so it's not usually articulated as a separate path, but it is so different in terms of actual practice. There's almost no deities in it. We'll find a couple of places where there's some references to deities, but it's not a deity-based practice, so it's very different than the basic way of practicing Tantra, although the texts themselves are Tantras. Okay, so it's part of the path of Tantra in the sense that the texts are called Tantras, but otherwise it's a very different path, and for that reason we've separated it out. In terms of ethics, the basic ethics of Tantra are no attachment or no aversion. Okay? It's kind of a fine line to walk, but the idea is that it's non-dual. This is called a non-dual practice. So it's neither attachment nor aversion. Okay? Transcend that. Padmasambhava said, "My view is vast as space, my behavior is fine as barley flour." Okay? And then the meditations. There's also some preliminary practices in Dzogchen called Korde Rushen, which means separation of nirvana from samsara. And it's separating the way we see things, which is samsara, ordinarily see things, from nirvana, which is a different worldview of seeing things. When we talked about pure view, it's really kind of a variation of pure view, and just seeing things in a very different way, the Dzogchen view of things. And so within that there are inner, outer, and secret practices that we will do, deal with body, speech, and mind, and so forth. Then the main two practices are Trepcho and Togao. Trepcho means to cutting through, and Togao means to leap over. Okay? So Trepcho is basically a form of shamatha. It's a shamatha without signs. There's nothing to focus on when you do that practice. You just rest in pure awareness. Okay? That's the whole practice. And then Togao is kind of like Vipassana, the wisdom aspect. And here, though, the wisdom is like space. It's not concrete. It's very open. And the goal is the attainment of what is called a rainbow body. A rainbow body is basically a Sambhogakaya form of the Buddha. Okay? And there are different forms of rainbow bodies that we'll talk about when we get to that and so forth. But that's the idea. And the main practice in Togao is called sky gazing. And so you go outside and you look at a blue, clear sky. It doesn't work as well when there are clouds. And we get a lot of pure blue skies here, so we have a lot of opportunity to do this practice. And you gaze up there, but it's kind of like a movie screen. And you're projecting images onto that. It's not like regular visualization where you're imagining something. You're waiting for these things to appear from your mind itself, from that awareness that you developed in Trepcho practice. Those then began to manifest as other kinds of images. And one of the reasons then for doing Tantra, because this is sometimes taught as a separate practice altogether, where people don't do the tantric practices. But what I've found, because I did it in that order, and had to go back and do the tantric practices, the visualizations, the visions that appear better if you've done the tantric practices where you're visualizing all of these things. They become embedded in you in a way that then make it easier for those to appear without just intentionally visualizing something. Okay? So doing those practices in that sequence can be very beneficial. In terms of the wisdom aspect, The wisdom aspect here is awareness emptiness. And so that sense of pure awareness that we were talking about as the practice, the rikpa, and emptiness combined in union together. Okay? Or sometimes referred to as clear light, sometimes rikpa. Those are the things that then we understand as the true nature of mind. And with each of these practices, when we get to them, we'll talk about the ethics in more detail, and we'll go through the various practices, which is the main part of each of them, and then we'll come back and conclude in each of those with a focus on the wisdom aspect and understanding that, and doing there's at least one practice in each of them that is specifically oriented toward the wisdom aspect as well. And in the end, we bring them together and talk about enlightenment itself, how we understand those, and go back and review the differences in terms of wisdom and so forth at the end. So that concludes an overview of the 2 paths for today, but the 4 paths altogether between last week and this week.